righty. Thank you, Richie. And welcome everybody to the July webinar. We've got a really unique session today. We have two speakers from Trécé, is it international but they represent a very unique company in pheromone technology and trapping technology. So if you do commercial pest control or even small scale stored product pest stuff, I think you'll find today's program interesting. So first up today is Larry Motes, and I'm going to ask Larry to talk a little bit. How long have we known each other, Larry? I think I first met you. Were you at Gregory then?
Yeah, probably at Gregory back
Yeah,
in in the oh goodness 2009 maybe.
too many
Yeah,
years
so
ago,
probably
man.
known.
Too many
Yeah.
years ago. But Larry's got extensive experience in the pest control industry. I think over 30 years in the pest control industry. So the way this is going to work today, Larry's going to talk a little bit about biology, and then we'll take a small break, and then Jessica Lindenmayer will kind of follow up on some of the things that Larry talked about. So Larry, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dan. I'm going to go ahead and get this loaded up real quick. Yeah, we Jessica and I really appreciate just getting a crazy message there. Just trying to get this to full screen. So yeah, we appreciate that. Like Dan said, over 30 years in operational pest control. Jessica and I were talking a couple weeks ago when we were together, and I've been receiving a paycheck for over 40 years with some form of bugs, one way or another. So I'm based in Greenville, South Carolina, and as I said, we're going to get into some more specifics, but we really appreciate the opportunity to speak to this group today. And our goal is to provide a transparent, useful information, those frequently asked questions. We're going to give you a manufacturer's viewpoint of a really cool category within pest control. So we'll cover some best management practices, and I think you'll find that we're going to give you very useful take-home things that you can implement into your business, whether that's commercial or residential. We do love feedback, so please utilize that Q&A block. Ask some questions because we all at Trécé, we really thrive on getting right in the field with you. We all came from operational pest control, and other than the three initial slides that I'm going to show you, it's not going to be an infomercial about our products. It's going to really be something that you'll find, I think, useful. So with that, I'm going to jump right on in. So I just kind of titled it very generically, Pheromone Overview. I am going to talk about pheromones, what they are, kind of different categories of pheromones, and monitoring with pheromones in particular. And then Dr. Lindenmayer is going to pick it up in the second segment and talk about mating disruption. That is our only control step. So our company is only a pheromone-based company. So our products utilize the biology of the insect pest to our advantage. Kind of the subtitle, Bugs That Eat Our Stuff, at least the ones we seldom talk about. I use that because, like Dan said, you probably rarely, if ever, get this kind of training on stored product pests. We will do some biology and some identification. So, I wanted to make sure that it's not always termites, ants, and roaches, right? And so I think that's the beauty of these kind of webinars. We can engage with a lot of people and talk about things that you don't hear a lot about. So with that, again, first slide. We're based in Adair, Oklahoma, just about 35 miles northeast of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Whenever I tell people, again, being from the Southeast here, I tell people our manufacturing and headquarters is in Oklahoma, and they immediately have a picture in their mind of the Dust Bowl. As you can see, this is beautiful hill country. This is our headquarters. This is our manufacturing and shipping. We make everything right here in the USA. Again, just for context, if you're not familiar with our products, or maybe you are using the StoreGuard brand or the Sidetrack brand of mating disruption, I just wanted to put that up there just for context. There are other manufacturers. We recognize that. And again, this is not going to be a sales talk. Just one new thing that we've got coming out. We're waiting on final label approval for a cigarette beetle mating disruption, but we'll let Jessica talk about that a little later. And then also on our website, you can download these partner guidelines. It's one-page PDFs on cigarette beetle, Indian meal moth, clothes moths, different kinds of things like that. We want you to use these things. And again, we don't mind if you brand them, but they are available for your use. So with that and kind of making that introduction, let's talk about kind of why, this is important. After COVID, the EPA and FDA, everyone really got excited about, the Food Safety Modernization Act. And so if you look at the violations, this is from 2021 to 2022, there was an increase of 183 citations from the year prior about pests not being excluded from the facility or utilizing pesticides in unlawful manner. Sanitation was big, sanitary operations, HACCP plan implementation. These are all safety things. And again, after COVID, things have just continued to ramp up because of safety and health concerns. And so this is a vital part of that, especially when it comes to stored product pest, because of how close they are related into our food chain, right? So again, a little call out on kind of the why we do what we do. And again, this particular slide, Mr. Jerry Heath, another board certified entomologist, we give him credit for this. Insect monitoring, which is what I'm going to focus on, is your IPM frontline. I know probably every speaker every month on this webinar series talks about IPM, but let's highlight a couple things today. Education, training, and practice. That's specifically what we're doing right now. We're going to look at identifications. We're going to understand the pest and assess what risk does that present into our work. Of course, sanitation and inspections, that's part of your job. That's part of your customer's job is to do the sanitation, but you're doing the inspections and pointing things out that are in deficits, right? Pheromone monitoring systems come under that physical thing that we can do when we're not on premises. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail, but trapping or monitoring, if you will, with pheromones is a very useful tool in the IPM process. And then, like I said, Dr. Lindenmayer will talk about mating disruption. Those are those physical controls, biologicals. And we recognize as a manufacturer, which does not use traditional pesticide chemistries, your last option in IPM, and again, we recognize that it's not a bad thing. This is not evil to use pesticides. Again, 30 years in operations, I've used my share of pesticides from malathion, Dursban, you name it. I've been in your shoes and I've used a lot of great products over the years, but that's just not what we're talking about today. It's not what we do. So let's talk specifically about pheromones and chiromone. So if you're not familiar with that term, maybe we learn a new term today as attractants or lures. In stored product pest, we use a lot of sex pheromones. And again, when I say sex pheromones, these are generated by the female insect to attract a mate, a male, right? And so that's primarily the general rule. When you talk about pheromones in stored product pest, that section of pheromones, we're usually dealing with sex pheromones, maybe aggregation with flower beetles. But again, I say usually, this is not 100% always the case. There are stink bugs that use, attracted males produce these, and they're attracting males and females. So it just depends. When we talk about chiromones, that can be multigender, so male and female attractants. So you'll see in some of the stored product pest monitoring with pheromones and chiromones, these are additives, not necessarily the insect generated, but maybe a food source. So let's take a little bit deeper dive into each one of those. As I said, pheromones defined, these are chemical secretions. Big scientific word, semiochemical. Sometimes you'll see these on state license exams. I was licensed at one point in 14 states throughout the Southeast. In short, that means it's a signal. This is a chemical secretion that's a signal. This is a way that they are communicating from one insect to another. We've known about these semiochemicals or pheromones since the 1870s, but it took about 100 years for us to really commercialize or develop these into useful products. So the late 1970s into the early 80s is really when companies like Trécé got into the game of commercial production. And the early years, 84 to the 90s, was, into the 2000s even, was aimed at agricultural things, orchard and fruit and nut crops. Again, as I said, usually aimed, targeted for the male, but sometimes the female. This is an intra-species communication. So these are designed for individual species to communicate with one another within their species. Now, kind of an interesting side note, there's some false signals out there, and I don't want you to jump off the webinar and go Google searching, but what I find fascinating is how cool things different arthropods are. There's the bola spiders that actually can secrete a mimic of a moth pheromone. And they're actually the bola spider, they're using like a lasso. They have not just spinning a web and hoping things happen. They're actively fishing for a moth. So they put out this false signal, this false pheromone. The male moth gets close to the web, and the spider actually slings a little globular substance on a string, necessarily kind of like a bola necktie, and that's how they catch their prey. So there's some really cool things out there when you're looking at pheromones in general. Ultimately, this is modifying the insect's behavior, and that's how we use these as commercial products to modify the behavior to allow them to do what we want them to do, and you'll see why here pretty soon. As I mentioned, there's many pheromone types. The most common types you see alarm pheromones. If you've ever encountered honeybees and gotten on the wrong side of a honeybee hive or yellow jackets or even ants, if you start crushing or swatting at them, they produce a pheromone that tells the other individuals of the colony, hey, we've got an intruder. Everybody, come to the rescue, and we're going to drive off the predator. Ants, of course, many of you have seen ants and how they trail and how well they lay down these pheromone trails to find a food source and then navigate back to the colony with that food. I mentioned flower beetles. They use aggregation pheromones. Bed bugs, I think, use some aggregation pheromones. And this is just, again, safety in numbers. Hey, we're all hanging out over here. Come over here. Maybe find a mate that way. But a lot of what we do in our business is derived on these sex pheromones. The female's putting out a scent, and the male is coming to respond to that. So let's talk a little bit more about chiromones. Chiromones are interesting. So as you see, it's kind of host identification and location. This is where even beetles and different stored product pests are looking for a potential food source. And so these smells that we can generate to mimic a food source, then that's going to attract all species or all genders. It can also be an attractant for predators. The best example I've always used is the bark beetle. Bark beetles have aggregation pheromone. They're under the bark of a tree, and there's a wasp that can actually sort of intercept or eavesdrop on that pheromone, and that's how they find their food. So they're after the larva. So these are parasitic wasps, and so they're, again, just like the bola spider, they're using that pheromone that's not produced by them, not for them, to their advantage. And so that's another cool way that we use chiromones as well as a potential food source or location. Some of the commercially available pheromones, I don't list them all here, but when we talk about stored product pests, commodities, coffee, rice, cocoa, tobacco, peanuts, almonds, pistachios, those kinds of things, whenever we're dealing with food crop commodities post-harvest, once they're out of the field and in a warehouse or in retail, these are the primary moths that we are looking to intercept. Indian meal moth, tobacco moth, almond moth, flower moth, raisin moth. Incidentally, those respond to the same pheromone, at least a small segment of the pheromone or attractant to IMM, Indian meal moth, and those four similarly related species. So we call that IMM plus four. So if you've ever seen packaging from different brands out there that talks about IMM plus four, they're just saying Indian meal moth is the primary target, but tobacco, almond, flower, and raisin moth will respond and will be attracted to the exact same molecule, right? So we use that as IMM plus four. So again, pro tip of the day, that's kind of where that comes from. We do have some specialty type moth species out there, the grain moth, Angoumois grain moth, and European grain moth. And then we'll also talk about some of the textile moths, webbing and case making clothes moth. They have individual species specific pheromones that are produced. So we'll talk about those here in just a little bit as well. Now, some of the beetles, moths and beetles are two of the biggest groups out there that we're always looking at. Cigarette beetle, probably the number two pest behind Indian meal moth that we look at. Flower beetle, again, a very, very predominant pest in commodities like flour, in bakeries and different, even on the grocery store, retail aisles. But carpet beetles, warehouse beetles, there's a lot of things out there that have species-specific pheromones that can be synthesized in laboratories for commercial use. That top one, black carpet beetle, is a good example of something that, although commercially available or producible, we can synthesize that molecule in the lab, but it's very, very expensive to produce. And the market is just not that big. There's not a lot of need that people want to specifically only want to target black carpet beetle. Dermestids are very important. We'll see a slide here about some other dermestids, but it's just not something that we want to sell that just because we can, right? So there needs to be a viable market, in the distribution channel that wants to see that. So, although possible, some of these we just don't make a lot of. So pheromone monitoring, this is your key benefit. So customers sometimes, when you make proposals for sales, and again, being 30 years in operations, I always said everyone is involved in sales, not just the salespeople. The service specialists, the technicians, whatever title you want to give them, people in the office and customer service, everyone is part of the sales process. And this is your key benefit. So pheromone monitoring works as your early warning system. It's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. When you're not there, you may have a weekly account, but very rarely, unless it's a hospital, maybe a school, are you out there daily. So pheromone monitoring, key benefit is this is your eyes and ears, so to speak, for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So when a customer says, why do you want to put up a monitoring system? Why should I pay you to put up a monitoring system? So what does it do for me? Why do we do it? Number one, detection. We want to detect what pest is present in your facility or in your commodity. So it's all about detection, finding the right pest that poses a threat to that commodity or to your brand, right? Especially if you're in retail food. Abundance, kind of what is the relative abundance? When you look at the trending week to week, day to day, whenever you're checking these monitors and you're recording the data, right? If you don't record it, it doesn't exist. So if you're going through the trouble of having a monitoring system, utilize the data to your advantage and you start tracking the relative abundance over a given amount of time. And I think Jessica will show you how important that is. Dr. Lindenmayer will show you how important that data recording is when we start talking about a control feature of mating disruption. And then verification. Is your control step, whether that's fogging, fumigation, crack and crevice, insect light traps. It's verification of, is your control step working or not? And that gives you that data to go back to your customer and kind of show that what you're doing and what they're paying you to do is actually performing and you're getting results. So detection, relative abundance of the size of the problem, and verification of your control step. So let's look at a couple things real quick. And again, I borrowed some of this thought from Caroline Conert, good friend of ours, technical director at Plunkett's Pest. She wrote an article back in 2023 in PCT Magazine, and I think it was titled Tricky Insects and Insect Light Traps. If you've done any commercial work, or even now, if you look at advertisements on TV, homeowners are buying insect light traps to use. It's the non-pesticide way. When you're trying to monitor abundance or you're trying to monitor what pest is present, I don't dismiss or discount the value of insect light traps for removing flies. This particular one is one of the larger ones. It's kind of one of the shock ones. It puts all the dead bodies in a collection tray. You notice there, if you've ever been in the back room of a grocery store, it's called a Vertipack. This is the hole in the wall that people throw their trash in. You notice the trash bag there is kind of lit up. That's because there's a hole, or the dumpster itself is open. Regardless of what the customer tells you, most of the time both doors are open, and this is how pests are getting in. But that insect light trap is serving a valid point, and it has use. I'm not dismissing that. But what I am saying is, from a monitoring perspective, it's not species specific. It's difficult to identify some of the pests because after they've been under that UV light for a couple of weeks, there's no color, they're blanched out, they're bleached, and it's very time consuming to go through all these non-target pests, like midges and flies and whatever else is in there. But different pest, different application into what you're trying to do from true pheromone monitoring. So let's look at it. Is this monitoring, or are we actually trying to control this particular pest? Is Indian meal moth. And again, this is a different brand. Like I promised, we're not making this an infomercial about our product. This is an actual customer. You notice this is on the shelf with some bird seed and animal feed, got a squirrel food there. Lots of different Indian meal moths. These are all males, right? Because this is a sex pheromone produced, kind of synthesized to produce a mimicked female. And it's obviously working very well. So we're trapping out a lot of males, right? And some people, again, if you listen to your customer, especially homeowners, they want more traps. The solution to this problem is we need more traps. And that's simply not the case. We're going to look at sort of the life cycle of Indian meal moth here shortly. If just one of those males mates with a female, one female can produce 400 offspring in the next 7 days of her life, right? So this is not a control step. We're literally monitoring, again, abundance, what pest is present, the abundance of this pest, and B, in a couple weeks, hopefully we've done some remediation, whether that's sanitation or pesticide application, or in a great case, mating disruption. Can we change the trajectory of this insect population within this retail location, right? So let's keep that in mind about that. Oddly enough, that particular problem was not caused by the obvious choice of a lot of grain product, corn and wheat and different seeds in a bag. That particular problem was caused by a new form of kitty litter, which has wheat as its base product, not using clay. They're using a wheat-based product. And so the inspection part of this, it took a little while to figure out. I don't see any problems on the cat food or the dog food or the bird food. It ended up coming from the opposite side of the aisle, and it was just, again, early adoption of the new non-clay forming, non-clumping litter had not taken hold, and this product sat for a very long time. So I've also seen this in the field, and I've got a couple pictures here. On the left, what I call Frankentrap. This is a Frankenstein. This is something that different people try different things. They've got an Indian meal moth lure there. There's a bullet lure in there for different beetles, and this was just in a black. Basically, I think this was designed to be a rodent station, but using for a different purpose on the shelf as opposed to the standard glue type trap. This one did have a glue board in it on the lid. On the right, with the big green arrow over there pointing to, I think these are weevils, if I remember correctly, the store, rather than vacuuming and providing good sanitation behind the product on the shelf, they decided just to put tape, packing tape. So I kind of like, well, I guess it is a form of glue board. It's a glue trap of sorts. But if you look along the wall there, especially the left side of that picture, in the pegboard, you see multiple beetles there consuming all the debris that was left over. So rather than vacuuming, I guess they decided to have a passive monitor. No lure, just using the food scraps that were left over and sticky tape. So customers can do some really fun things for you. All right, for those of you that you're watching, hopefully you're really paying attention, and I'm keeping your attention to the matter. If you're scrolling on Facebook, I really want you to stop right now, and I want everyone's eyes and ears on the screen because this is a very, very important subject to us as a manufacturer. When we talk about residential versus commercial monitoring, the traps that you buy from distribution, all of our products are available at the major distributors. I'll give shout outs. Oldham, Viseras, Target, BWI, all of the major players, Forshaw, all of the major distributors carry commercial use products. Some of them are designed to be used in residential, sure. But these are very, very high loaded pheromone traps. You can go on Amazon, of course, and you can buy cheap traps. The pheromone is kind of put into the glue itself. It's highly volatile. It flashes off. Some of them can be very effective, short run, impressive to a homeowner, but these are commercial traps. And so when we look at the difference of using pheromone monitoring within residential accounts versus commercial, let's talk about expectations. Mrs. Smith at her home does not want to see one little brown moth flying around her TV at night, right? So one moth and the expectation of what she expects or what he expects, Mr. Smith, we won't discriminate the bug lovers out there. They just have a very low limit, right, to what they're willing to tolerate. And it can be very annoying to have little brown moths flying around your TV while you're watching your favorite show. I get it. When you're talking about a commercial food storage warehouse, a distribution center, the expectations are vastly different. I've been in green coffee warehouses, literally millions of pounds of green coffee stored, and the webbing is just unbelievable. The number of moths flying around. I was in a different food crop commodity last week, and there were literally thousands of moths flying around the outside of the building. There were so many that the barn swallows were dive bombing us to get to the moths, right? And that's just how many there were. So you have a different set of expectations. And so when I say mindset, um, let's talk about the next thing. I've actually had commercial warehouse managers refuse to have insect pheromone monitors in their facility because they were convinced that the monitor was creating the problem, that we're actually attracting them into the facility. Maybe Dr. Lindenmayer has time to talk about it, but there's scientific research. I think it was USDA. I don't want to quote names because I could be wrong, but USDA put out something about the commodity itself, whether that's coffee, cocoa, peanuts, tobacco. The commodity, and we talked about pheromones, they're producing a smell that female moth really wants. And let's remind you, say you have a monitor right next to the door in a facility. If it comes in through the door, and yes, the monitor actually does invite one in, it's a male. the male's not going to hurt you. It's not going to lay eggs, right? So you're getting an occasional, intruder that way, and that's okay. I also want to flip that over back to residential. So the most common thing that I see that creates problems in residential when you're using these types of monitors is having too many in the residence. We're going to talk about kind of how many and the scope of the problem. I'll give away the answer here quick. This one trap has enough pheromone for about 2,500 square feet. I got a call 2 weeks ago from residential PCO out in California, and he was new to this. He had not used monitors very much. And I asked him, my first question was, what seems to be the problem? It's Indian meal moth. I do have it identified correctly. He showed me a picture. Yes, I agree. It's Indian meal moth. There were probably 50 in the laundry room. And he's asking me about, what should I do? And as he scanned around, he had me on video chat. He scanned around. He literally had 12 monitors in a very small laundry room. That's just too many, right? You're basically creating a bigger problem because in residences, and again, please listen carefully. In residential pest control with stored product pests, especially moths, you don't want to leave these up year round. Once you find the source and you get rid of the problem, you probably don't want to do year-round monitoring just to detect, because there is a feral population of Indian meal moth all over the country. And yes, you could invite males back into the residence after that initial problem was gone. So back to my California story. So he couldn't find the problem. I asked him, did you look in the pantry? Yes. Did you find anything? No. Did you look in the garage? Did you look in the closet? Bird seed, cornhole bags. Is there some sort of grain? Did you look in the attic? Are there Christmas decorations using natural products? Yes to all of those. Couldn't find the problem. Went on for a couple weeks. I called him back, hadn't heard from him. I was like, how's it going? He goes, problem solved. I was like, what'd you find? A bag of walnuts in the pantry. So again, thorough inspection. You can find the source, usually in residential. Take home story, expectations and mindset is very different between residential and commercial. These do not cause the problem. In residential, again, using too many for too long, yes, you can attract a few moths back in if you're not careful. So just throw that out there. And then you see find the source in quotations there. I put that up. We're going to see something here very shortly about finding the source, and that's always been a fun story of looking for the problem as it exists. The other kind of funny part of this slide that I'm going to show you is talking about a probe trap. These are available as a commercial thing. This is a plastic tube. You inject it directly into the commodity, whether that's peanuts or coffee beans or tobacco, whatever, and it's a pitfall trap. And so you can bait it and make it an active monitor with lures, or you can just be passive. Sometimes the bugs just like to get out of the grain and they just want to take a break from crawling around and all that moving stuff. And then there's a little catch cup at the bottom. But these are called probe traps because you're probing into the commodity itself to find the pest, right? But so coming up on this next slide, a little video, hope it works. This came out of Texas last year, and we'll talk about find the source and listen to what this is a news anchor. Listen to what the news anchor says about a probe in this next video clip.
Your milk quality can be greater through stronger defense against disease.
The city of Levelland continues to face a beetle infestation that has yet to subside. The infestation was first reported a month ago after red flower beetles were found inside homes north of Highway 114. Entomologists with the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension determined the pests were coming from a grain facility across the highway. The facility was ordered to take care of the problem within 10 days or face fines. The city of Levelland then issued a probe to measure if the nuisance was abated. Today, the city received those results showing no reduction in the beetle population. The grain facility will now face fines of up to $2,000 a day until that problem is solved.
So again, this is kind of a very, if you listen closely, like I suggested, he said the city of Levelland issued a probe, meaning an investigation. Yes, there was an ongoing investigation, but we were actually working with this PCO, and they were using probes to find out, probe traps to find out if the population was increasing or decreasing. So, you can always rely on your news anchor to not quite understand everything about it. And then the other reason I wanted to show this was, supervisors, managers, technicians, everybody's always about find the source. Well, this source was about a half a mile away. It had nothing to do with the houses that were being infested. And there literally were hundreds of these flower beetles in houses across a major highway and even down the road from this facility. These were, I think, walnut hulls or almond hulls or something being stored outside, and red flower beetles were just putting them to use. So you can't always find it in the facility that you're working on. Sometimes you have to actually look in different places, but typically stored product, pest or within the facility that you're working on. And there we go. Let's see. So how many monitors do you really need for sufficient coverage? We talked about this hanging style, diamond traps, these warehouse type traps for IMM +4, cigarette beetle, warehouse beetle, things that fly that you're going to monitor for. 50 by 50 foot in all, think about a bubble, 50 feet up, 50 feet down, side to side, 2,500 square feet of coverage in all directions. So again, these are very powerful attractants, and that's as a general rule. You check with your particular vendor about what trap and what design you use. Our recommendation is about, at least 50 by 50 feet. There are some dome style traps for your beetle species that can fly. Some like cigarette beetle, they can fly. They would prefer to walk. So they fly around, they'll land, and then they'll walk to the lure. So confused and red flower beetle, confused doesn't fly, red does fly, but again, they prefer to walk. So these dome style or these floor type traps, about 900 square feet is again your pro tip of the day. You're looking about 900 square feet of coverage. So when you look at a facility map, again, this is a commercial facility. The little blue zeros will be hanging traps. The X's will be your floor type traps for different beetle species. So this is kind of a generic layout. You see we have all your major areas covered. You've got good range in all different types of the facility, whether that's packaging, into the mixing room, flower room, the mezzanine, the loading docks. So you're covering that fairly well across the board. Let's talk about trap maintenance. We get this and we see this when Dr. Lindenmayer and James Miller is on the call as well from Trécé. They're both at our Oklahoma facility and headquarters and manufacturing. We see this when we're in the field. Typically, we kind of like to say 4 to 12 weeks. The pheromone lure itself will last more than 10 weeks, but depending on the environment and the type of facility, if it's really clean, like a clean warehouse where there's not a lot of dust and debris, maybe 6 to 12 week intervals. But in a producer, shelling plant for peanuts or almonds, if you can get a month, you're doing great because just so much dust is generated in these facilities. So the fallback is when it's dirty and you can't get any more, or there's too many insects on the board to have any more available glue or adhesive, then you need to change those out. Some of the dome type floor traps, you can add oil to them to kind of refresh them. I've even seen people kind of picking off individual moths so they don't recount them next time. I think you're more conducive to your labor and profit if you just replace the trap versus trying to pick those off, but do what you want. We talk a lot about this as well. Storage of the unused traps. How long do they sit on the shelf? I will say this, as a general rule, moth lures and pheromones are more shelf stable than beetles. 6 months to a year in an unopened package, especially if it's kept cooler. So those columns, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. So the colder it is, even up to freezing over on that right-hand column with the little squares, that's in a freezer. You can have an unopened package for up to 2 to 3 years in a package. But again, as a general rule, moth species pheromones are more stable in packaging than not. Heat and air are your biggest enemies. Do not ride these around in your service vehicle, especially in the summertime. Here in Greenville today, it's 99 degrees inside of my truck. If I had those sitting on the truck dash, it'll be 140 degrees in there. That's going to ruin pheromone very quickly. So don't ride these around unnecessarily. Keep them as cool as you can, and definitely keep them out of sunlight and keep them in a sealed package. So let's do a little biology real quick. Again, I see some thumbs and some emojis coming up. I appreciate that. Both Dr. Lindenmayer and I, we both talked about it. Since we're not live in front of an audience, I can't see you. I can't get any feedback from body language. So we really have to get into character about pretending that my computer screen is the audience. And I love to see the thumbs up. So I appreciate those. Obviously, this is Indian meal moth, one of the easier stored product pests to identify. Has that golden coppery colored on the back end there, half-inch long or so. So Indian meal moth, probably the #1 pest worldwide in all commodities. Real quick, I won't cover all of this, but in essence, they can complete a life cycle, egg to adult, in less than a month if they're really in great conditions. They can also extend out if it's a little cooler than normal in a warehouse, 240 days of feeding for the larva. The adults, thankfully, do not feed. And the adult lifespan is about 2 to 14 days. And I would say if you get one to live 2 weeks, you're in a perfect, ideal lab setting. Dr. Lindenmayer is growing these in the lab to get them to go 2 weeks. My experience is in the field, about a week, 7 days is about the normal adult lifespan. But there can be 8 generations in a year, especially here in the Southeast. Their ideal range, anywhere 59 degrees is the cold side and 90 degrees is the upper limit where they really do well. I'll say something about 59 degrees. Yeah, they will slow down, but temperature really is not their biggest enemy on where they want to mate or not. It has to do with day length. So as we get into the fall and go back on the clock, day length matters a lot more than temperature, but there is a limit, 45, 49 degrees where they just stop flying. 59, they really start, they're just not interested, but they're on the edge. So it's pretty cool. You see tap, tap, tap there. Here's something I want you to do. If we have time, I have a little kind of a special presentation. What I like to say is humans are terrible at smell, right? We don't smell as well as insects. And so when we talk about pheromones, we can't detect that. So if we substitute sound for smell, this is what I like to do, especially when I'm in person. So I just want you to lightly tap on your desk right now. Everybody just a little light tap. If we substituted smell and sound for human sake, the female moth is sitting on a shelf in the commodity, and she doesn't want to go out and find a male. She's going to put out pheromone, and she's tap, tap, tap. She's making that smell. She's calling to the male, come and see me, right? So we're going to talk about that. When we put out a monitor, instead of that light, tap, tap on your desk, I want you to take your hand and actually clap. So for sound sake, quote unquote, the smell of a monitor is versus that little tap, right? And then Dr. Lindenmayer, if I have time, I'll do something fun for you. But when we talk about mating disruption, we go from a tap, tap, tap of a female moth making a little light call to a monitor making just very loud, just that continuous tapping, clapping sound. All right, a little quick video, won't play along. You see all life stages are present. You see a couple of them actually mating there over on the right center. But you see larvae crawling around. This is wheat. This is Indian meal moth doing its thing. Here we have a close-up. Once a female moth is mated, she has an ovipositor. Again, pro tip of the day, if you're trying to distinguish a male from a female, the females have a very pointed abdomen. The males have a very rounded, blunt abdomen. So you can actually tell in the field if you have some magnification. You see her laying eggs there. As I mentioned earlier, she can lay up to about 400 eggs in her lifetime, which again is about a week. So very, very big problem. Another thing I always like to bring up, Indian meal moth has a feral population, like most of our pests, cigarette beetle and some of the other moths. There is an outdoor feral population, especially if you're going to make life easy and put cat food out in boxes and give them water. This, just so you know, I took this picture many years ago. This was directly just to the left off camera there was the back door loading dock at a grocery store. Slow down cats at play. Not only did they have a rodent problem, but they had Indian meal moth problems because you're making life very easy for this feral population of Indian meal moth. All right, switching gears to a beetle. I like to use this one, and I use tricky little things to help remember. The shape of the antenna, the segments on the antenna make this identification really useful, as do those pits, those lines on the elytra, the wing covers of the abdomen. Those pits or lines really signify what this species is. And so you can get good at some of these very common insect store product pests. You see on the antenna, three main lobes on the outer edges of the antenna. This particular one is drugstore beetle, although it's two words. Look at the end of drugstore beetle. So that's my little crazy way of just remembering, because in the field and over time, sometimes it's hard to remember which is which, because there is a look-alike. Briefly, we'll cover life cycle up to 200 days. 600 days is kind of the max of larvae while feeding, so they can postpone development for a very long time. And they will mate shortly after eclosion. Eclosion is just coming out of the pupal case. Adult lifespan about 2 months. So again, much shorter than that in the wild. And their temperature, they can get on up there to around 98 to be ideal. So here's the look-alike. You notice no lines or pits on those elytra, the wing covers of the abdomen. And if you look at the antenna, lots of segments. This is a serrated, looks saw-like, sawtooth-like, but this one has lots of lobes, not just three. So this one, I kind of use cigarette. The number of letters in cigarette is about the same as the number of segments on that antenna. Again, look at the lifespan of the adult. The call out there, remember, drugstore was 30 to 60 days. This is 6 to 10 days. So they don't live very long, much like IMM. And again, much shorter lifespan. They just don't go through these long, extended larval periods. So they can multiply very quickly. So again, that's why the cigarette beetle is probably the number 2 worldwide pest in commodity. Real quick, I don't want to run out of time. I want to make sure we break on time here. Almost done. We'll get through these. But again, furry antenna, that's your cigarette beetle or furry larva. They're very fuzzy looking, have a dark head capsule. They feed on a lot of things, so that's not really important. I give a shout out to Penn State University, some great stuff there. Grains Canada, again, just showing you some photographs. Very important pest. This is one of the flower beetles. And again, you look at how the tapering of that antenna. One of my favorite websites, not that UGA and some of the other universities don't put out really good high quality images. I just like the way that Grains Canada, the Canada Grain Commission, their website, if you look up that, they have such a great way that they display the different insect pests and how they categorize. So if you're interested in learning your store product pest identification and you want to, take a maybe ACE exam or BCE exam, I highly recommend Grains Canada. Look at their insect identification pages. I think you'll find them very good. This particular one, again, tapered off. The insect itself is not confused about what it is. We are. This is confused flower beetle. Tribolium, again, there's a lot of species of Tribolium, so don't be alarmed if it doesn't quite fit all this. I saw one this week coming out of South Florida that was about 3 times the normal size. I think it's probably one of the lesser known Triboliums out there. But again, you'll notice the antenna, how they taper off into a bigger segment here versus, adult lifespan 24 months. Which is a long time for an insect, especially in stored product. And the adults do feed. Versus this one, they have the last 3 segments of the antenna. Think about RED for red flower beetle, 3-lobed at the very end, RED, red flower beetle. Very similar. Again, red flower beetle, they can fly. Confused, not so much. You see this adult sitting on wheat, a kernel of wheat. So what is this? About 3 millimeters max length. So again, very long lifespan as adults. Spend a good bit of time, 120 days or so as a larva. So side by side, again, that's why they call them confused. It's not confused. We were confused when looking at it. It is a separate species. Again, slight difference in antennal segments. But again, JFDL photograph here. We love to shout out and allowing him to, letting us use these things. Flower beetles doing what they do best, crawling very quickly through flower. So why does it matter? I'll go through this kind of quick. When you look at red flower beetle and you start monitoring for that, you're only going to see about 10% of the population. So when I say, what is the relative abundance and what does that monitor tell me? You're only seeing, 10% of that infestation is going to be in the adult stage. RFB requires 2 times more fumigant to control versus other SPPs. One of the, again, theories behind that is there's no aeropiles, these openings in the egg case of red flower beetle. IMM, for instance, has 12 to 14 holes in their egg case where, gas exchange can come through. You can still kill RFB eggs with fumigants, but it is much more difficult. Again, adults feed, they spend very little time proportionately in the larval stage versus, something like IMM. Again, multi-species of Tribolium, not just those 2, but these are the most common. And you can get non-native species can be introduced into the U.S. Again, had one, saw it on a show night before last. If you've ever seen the show Contraband, Seized at the Border TV show, they were, a gentleman was flying in from India. He had a bunch of bean seeds. He had, I think they were chickpeas or something, and they seized him at the border because of copper beetle. And so very interesting, that you see that in a large, international show like that. It was pretty interesting. So this is why it matters to learn your identification. Real quick, let's talk about fabric pests. Again, I do recognize I'm coming up on the hour here. The main thing about fabric pests, your clothes moths, they are after keratin. These are things that your fingernails, toenails, hair fibers are made of. Keratin is that key ingredient that they're after as a food source. And so things like cotton, I've seen them damage cotton products, but they're not after it for a food source. Usually when they're on other textiles other than things like wool or natural fibers, hair fibers, they're after the sweat from wearing the t-shirt, and that isn't more of an attractant than the cotton. They won't feed on it for very long, but they will damage it sometimes. Again, easy to identify because this is case making because he's carrying his little larval case with him. This is their little protective case. They'll make this out of their food source. This happened to be probably a rug, had some red dye in it. So this little caterpillar was dragging his little sleeping bag with him. Case making. Again, about 30 days, 60-day life cycle. And I've seen these in a lot of different places. Cool looking little moth, golden color, kind of neat looking. This one, again, I think this one's really cool. It's got a nice little head of hair there, nice golden shiny color, fringes on the tips of the wings, real pointy wing tips. Rarely do you see one in this good a shape. They're usually all flopped out and all the scales are off their wings, but this is webbing clothes moth. Again, about the same life cycle, not a lot of difference between those. Again, shout out to bugguide.net, another favorite website of mine, because again, just if you're really wanting to do a deep dive on finding species, that's a really good website for you to look at. Again, UGA, Dan and the team at Extension, they do a phenomenal job of producing things like this. But this is a very detailed, a lot of great pictures, high quality imagery for you to look through. I talked about carpet beetles earlier. Yeah, they're just very frustrating, and after a lot of different types. I already mentioned black carpet beetle. There is a lure, but you don't see it commercially available very much because of the expense of producing it. And the larva, of course, very distinct larval shapes. Incoming shipments. We're seeing this in the field a lot. Different commodities are requiring that their shippers from one warehouse to another in the distribution channels, requiring incoming shipment monitoring. So that's becoming a thing now. So if your customers are asking you about that, there are different monitors available for that kind of situation. So these are short range monitors, can help you locate a small infestation in a warehouse, but they're very useful in containers and helping you find it. So the idea is you put it in with the commodity when you ship it on the outgoing shipment. When it arrives at your customer's dock, they open it, they inspect the monitor. If it's got bugs in it, they call you, come and fog it, fumigate it, do whatever you want to do to it, but let's fix it, push it away from my dock in the meantime. Don't download this or unload this into my warehouse and make my warehouse infested with whatever that is. So that's becoming a thing. Outdoor monitoring, again, can't say enough about that because this will help you monitor what's going on at the facility before it gets to the inside. Because again, these are feral populations. This is a bakery in the middle of a agricultural setting, and they had quite a large problem with different things. This is kind of what you can do. This is that vertipack on the outside. You see the number of Indian meal moths, and if you look closely, you can see some probably warehouse beetle and cigarette beetle in there as well. Monitoring proactively will help you find out what's about to happen on the inside and help you show the customer that the problem can be coming from mistakes. You see the hole on that left picture right underneath the trap there, where insects can come into that vertipack and into the back room. I think we're about to the last slide here. So this is 24 hours. This is a glue board on the outside of a food commodity in South Georgia just last week. This is literally less than 24 hours. It has warehouse beetle, cigarette beetle, and IMM. And again, this is how quickly you can detect a pest on the outside of a facility and help you alert and prepare for what's going to happen on the inside of that facility. All right, so there's my contact information. If you want to take a quick picture of that, I know Dan will probably download that. I've also for you digital guys and girls out there that you don't want to type that into your phone. I also have it in QR code mode. We're going to do questions at the end of Dr. Lindenmayer, but there's my QR code. If you scan that in, you can download my info. I use an app called Blink. It won't make you buy anything or do anything. You won't get any ads, but there's my contact info. As I promised, I think hopefully Dan will give me one more minute here. But as promised, let's see if we can get this to work. So we talked about tap, tap, tap. The female calling, the monitor. You know, the monitor is so much heavier of a pheromone smell. The males are going to be more attracted to this loud noise. So when Dr. Lindenmayer talks about mating disruption, this is what you would, if you were a moth, and again, we're substituting sound for smell. If you're a moth in a facility, this is what this is your environment for the next 6 months. Again, short ad here.
We've got passion, we've got determination.
Okay.
And if we set our sights on something, you better believe it's happening.
Love you too. Again, turn your speakers up and think about being at a Metallica concert and you're sitting right in front of a stadium full of speakers. Right? This is your life as a moth, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, under mating disruption. Right? So again, I appreciate everyone listening, and just let that go. Hopefully that made a point of just what mating disruption will do for a moth.
We didn't know you were a Metallica fan, Larry.
Of course, of course. Sorry,
Good stuff.
I noticed I snuck over a little bit, but I think Jessica will allow for that.
Yes, very good. I wrote down several points that I've invited people to type some questions for Larry. We're going to take about a 3-minute break, and I've got some comments here and some questions for you, Larry, at the end. So, folks? Why don't we take about a 3-minute break? And Jessica, you can come on about 10 after. You can go till about 5 o'clock. Will that work? Okay, so folks,
I did read lips on that one. It was a yes.
Okay, let's say
Yes, I
7
think
minutes.
I'll be well under. I don't want to keep everybody here when they're trying to go home. So
Okay, well, I've got 7 after. Let's come back. Let's start in about 3 minutes. Just have time to get up, go get a cup of coffee, and run back to the computer. So we'll see y'all in 3 minutes.
perfect.
Thanks. You about ready to roll, Jessica?
I think so. I think Larry set us up for great vibes. So
Okay, yeah, very good. So Richie's going to take this down. Yeah, that was a really good setup for you, Dr. Lindenmayer. So
yeah.
Dr. Jessica Lindenmayer, tell us a little bit about yourself, Jessica. But you are the global Field R&D Coordinator for Trécé. Is that correct? Tell us a little bit about kind of what you do, what your background is. I know you went to Oklahoma State, and how long you've been with Trécé, and a little bit about that. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
So if I were to say what my background is, I honestly would say that I'm an agronomist. I grew up, academically speaking, in row crop. I think corn, soybeans, cotton, sorghum. And I did a lot of work in row crop ag as far as efficacy and pesticide testing and development of thresholds in order for sampling protocols and that kind of thing for emerging ag pests. When I interviewed for Trécé, my CEO was really honest with me. He said, we don't really deal that much in row crop ag. So I don't think I can dedicate an entire position to that, but I really like you. So how do you feel about stored products? And at the time, I had no idea what that was. So unlike Larry, I do not have 40 years experience in this. I have going on 7 now, though. And I think the biggest blessing that's come to me is that unlike a lot of different companies, as an R&D scientist, I wasn't placed in a silo of R&D. I have been very lucky to get to be out in the field, and 100% honest, I feel like in the last 6 years, I've fast-tracked into understanding this world so much better because I feel as though I was trained by service specialists and PCOs. And if you are in the field working in these facilities with sanitation specialists and service providers, technicians, fumigators, you're going to learn so much more than you will in a classroom. So I've really come to understand some of the needs that need to be addressed as far as mating disruption and other monitoring and that kind of thing. And just to be really honest with you guys before we get started, I'm not going to give you a lecture on an academic standpoint. What I'm going to try and provide is the manufacturer's insider look at mating disruption and how to make this a more approachable tool. The things that I talk about are issues that I've seen in the field literally in the last 3 weeks. So I think as manufacturers, we get so used to knowing our product inside and out, we forget that you guys don't. So I think one of the things that we can do is make really easy to use products like mating disruption, not just ours, but everybody's, make them more approachable and show how you guys might want to incorporate those as an IPM tool in your facilities and things. And kind of, I tried to make a list of where we were, where we're headed, what we currently have available, and all the things that I've seen that make mating disruption, quote unquote, not work. Because trust me, you guys are very outspoken and you know your stuff. And I've been told over and over, well, mating disruption doesn't work. So let's talk about why it may not have worked in the past, and maybe we can reevaluate some of those situations. So with that, I will share my screen. Oh, there's two options. Let's try that.
We got it.
Hey, is it up?
Yep, we got it.
Sure is.
All
Looking good.
One very generic plain screen. You're right. Looks great. All right. So kind of set up my talk already for what is going to work. There we go. So what we're going to talk about today is, why we had the assumptions that we did about mating disruption from the beginning. And then we're going to go into what's available, what we understand currently, and then all the things that I have just seen go wrong. And this is something that Larry will tell you. This is something James will tell you. We're a very transparent company. We really like the research and the data to speak for itself. We don't have to give you guys a whole lot of jargon. But what we will tell you is that the molecule itself is not the secret. The proprietary product that we're selling you has to do with how we deliver the molecule. So if we're talking, zeta, that is the main component of a pheromone for Indian meal moth, as long as the zeta is present in the right amount and you have enough placements, it's not going to go wrong. So the only way that mating disruption cannot work is usually one of these, 5 bullets. So that's what we're going to talk about. So in the beginning, there was coddling moth and apples. So that's really where we started. So let's talk about where a lot of these assumptions came from, where I see mating disruption go wrong. Is one, originally it was based on ag pests. Ag pests are very sensitive to their own pheromone. They're usually migratory, and so they're going to search for females from miles away. And so that long distance mate searching. We're not talking about within a facility, we're talking miles. And they don't like competition a whole lot. So when you inundate an orchard with female pheromone, you're going to have a lot of females be like, oh, well, this is overcrowded, I'll move to another location. You don't get that in stored products. Stored products are like, bring it on. Points of release. So the mating disruption mechanism in ag was false trail following. So our products and a lot of other products, we all started with this small dispenser. And if you read the labels, it's like, I'm going to need to put 3,000 of these in this PetSmart. And no one actually wants to do that. But that all comes from ag. So in ag, you want false trail following because that's the competitive mechanism of which this works. You got to think you're in an open orchard. You don't have walls and a ceiling, right? And so what happens then is that you actually have the male moth going to a dispenser instead of to a female and not finding her to mate. Well, that's not really the case, and we'll talk about that in stored products. Seasonal, they get pretty lucky in a way that their fruit set happens for about 12 to 16 weeks. Stored products, we don't have that luxury. Our commodity is always susceptible, period. We don't really have a season. You might get lucky where, you're in a more northern longitude and you can, only really have a harsh pest season when you're getting that immigration coming in. From July to September, but most of us don't live in that world. Biofix date, we know that they're going to start mating because the males show up in the trap at X date, and then we put in a mating disruption, you're good to go. We don't have that. There are constantly lots of different generations in a year, and you're in these perfect environments and you have lots of host food for them to live off of. And so ours is a little bit tougher in some areas. And then this whole thought of trap shutdown, which is an ag pest thing. So if you have a big amount of pheromone in an orchard, they won't find, because they're so much more sensitive and their competitive mechanisms are different than stored product pests. So they will not find their trap. And you have what's called trap shutdown. And this is where you have enough pheromone present that it renders monitoring essentially useless. Well, that is not the case at all in stored products. In fact, stored product female moths are like, bring it on, I will outcompete this. So they still find a way to find their trap. Now, they won't find it from far, and usually we're under arrestment and they're walking into a trap, but you don't have any of these things that, we traditionally thought of for mating disruption, which all came from ag mechanisms. So, moving forward for today, what is commercially available? We have lots of different mating disruption type substrates. Like I said, the molecule itself is not unique. It's the substrate that we're selling you. And all manufacturers will agree to that. So you have, Allure MD over here with the gel pack. You've got the notorious puffers. There's some sort of lure pack with gel in it. And then you've got our PVC, which is extruded technology, and then micro-encapsulated pheromone with slow release mechanisms and that kind of thing. So there's all these different ways to apply the same pheromone. In this slide, we're not here to, push product by any means, but the only reason we have this is because every type of substrate is used in a different way for a different reason. So the pack of, small 36 is for small application areas, increased coverage of MD in certain zones. I would even argue that at this point. The other thing about that is that regulatory components in some countries, this is all you can have. And that's a regulatory thing. There's nothing we can really do about that. Then large dispensers, these are my favorite. It's just all the time release, large dispensers, large load rates, makes our life a lot easier because you can load a lot more there. Less is more. And, but sometimes you can't have something hanging at all. And so you're going to want to use something liquid, or, if you already have, applicators that are used to doing a spray or a ULV, and you want some mating disruption incorporated, you always have the liquid versions that you can use for application instead. One of my favorite applications for liquid was movie theaters. So a lot of people don't think about this, but your cheapo $5 matinee type movie theaters have a lot of Indian meal moth
dispensers. Eventually, they'll become what's like a.
Sorry, James, I'm going to turn you off. But we have all of these moths just lined up for this. And this is an area where we, in the urban and structural, commercial and residential, we have this really fun pest called humans interacting with our job. And so I have literally seen people grab one of our dispensers, put it in their pocket, and walk away. One of the workers in a manufacturing site, and when I asked him why he did that, he said, because they're always listening. So if you are in a very public area and you need a way to have mating disruption that is not visible, that's where liquid comes in. So all of this to say, mating disruption is a very viable tool. It comes in lots of different substrates and different companies that do it. And what does it do? It improves control. It reduces damage. Usually very easy to apply as soon as you get these principles that we're about to learn today. There's no facility downtime, so it's not like a fumigation. I I was in the pet retail stores spraying I'm and Mech while people were shopping. So it's not you don't have to stop working to do it. And then passive dispenser, no aerosol spray, adulterating chemicals, nothing, dripping on anything. It can be its control, its prevention, and it's certified organic. So that's one of those benefits. So in a lot of areas, I know a lot of you guys have sites where they're organic, and I mean, you can only use so much Diagon, right? So got to move on. So let's talk about the most important component of mating disruption. And I love using this gift from Parks and Recs because, he says, I think what you heard was I need a lot of bacon and eggs. And what I meant was I need all the bacon and eggs you have. Do you understand? And so I feel this way all the time with PCOs. I need every cubic foot you have. I'm not asking for a lot of them. I'm asking for every cubic foot you have. So when we talk about mating disruption, the 3 things you need to do to make sure this works. 1, calculate the complete volume, every cubic foot you have. Select an application rate. We'll talk about that in a minute. And distribute dispensers in a strategic pattern. We will talk about that as well. So what does it mean, every cubic foot you have? These are things that I hear from you guys all the time. That's cold storage. I realize it's 41 degrees in there, and I understand that they're not mating in there and that there's no population in there, but what I've seen in the last 20 minutes was, as I stood here, 6 to 8 different forklifts drove in that facility, and every time they drove in, I get this flash of cold air in my face. What does that tell me? It tells me that warm air is going over the top and it is pushing that cold air back out at me, which means all of your mating disruption AI is coming from the warm air in the facility that you need it in into that cold storage where it's not being utilized. So you need to accommodate for that. I think we're going to get questions at the end. Sorry, Jennifer. I'll come back to you, I promise. The door only opens sometimes. This is classic. I know PCOs hear it all the time from facility managers. Well, that door, don't mind that door. And there's nothing in there, right? There's never anything in there. We never store product in there. Liar. No, they always do, and it opens all the time. You're losing air to it all the time. If it shares a roof line, it needs to be included. Something that a lot of people don't think of, even our pro MD applicators, is that HVAC. The HVAC system. Is it air conditioned? Is it connected? That includes offices, break rooms, and equipment storage. Why does this matter? Well, we found out this mattered in tobacco manufacturing clear back in 2021, 2020. So originally we had tried to do some research where there were bays in the downstairs. And so each bay was about 1.2 million cubic feet. So what we were going to do is we were going to do different dispenser densities, like a low, medium, and a high, in all 3 of these bays, right? We're going to see how much control we got in these 3 different bays. Well, as you can see from this graph, this is the entire facility. In about a month, the entire facility was controlled. And we had only treated about a fourth of that facility, and it was in a completely separate. So this is, in total, this facility was about 45 million cubic feet, and we treated 3 bays, and it ended up causing the entire facility's beetle captures to be reduced. So what we learned from that is that if there's an HVAC system that is running through the entire facility, we need to account for that because that is going to move that molecule. Air and big fans and dispersion is, one of the most important things to really get your MD to work. But you got to keep in mind all of these things: cold storage, door isn't open, whatever. If it has an HVAC, if it has the same roof line, include that in your cubes. And for all you fumigator guys out there and gals, do not subtract the load value. This is not the same as fumigation. We're not going to lock it in and hold it at a certain place. This molecule is going to move as it chooses throughout the entire facility, in and out of different substances. So make sure that you include all of that. So different ways to do that. Ideally, you would get an engineer to give you CAD drawings, and then you can actually know exactly how big each part of your facility is. Other things you can do is a laser measuring device. That's what I just got done doing week before last. Is I have a laser pointer that measures up to 350 feet for me, and so I can double check your cubic feet if we're not getting the results that we're looking for. Google Earth is never a bad idea. At least if you do Google Earth, you can get 2 of the 3 measurements you need, and then all you have to do is get the roof. And then feel free to ask us, because we're always happy to help. This is a really nice refresher if you want to take a picture of this slide, just so you can remember how to do this. So to get your cubic feet, if it's just a rectangle with a flat roof, you would just do base times height times width, right? And that gives you this cubic feet. Now, if you have a triangular roof, the first thing you're going to do is get the area of a triangle, which is your 1/2 base times height, and then you multiply that by the length. And then total, this is the number you would give to us, and then, or any other manufacturer, and then they plug in your numbers and just, work with you on pricing and how many dispensers you need. So, always ask us if you are uncertain, because this is the only thing that will ensure mating disruption doesn't work, is if you're underdosed. These are some really fun things that Larry shared with me. If you want to measure your roof height by just going to the good old DG Emporium, Dollar General, down the road, buying a couple balloons, and then you can measure your roof height that way. If you don't have your laser or any other measuring device, there are ways to do it. And then this is a really good thing. Here's the dispensers here, and here's a fan. That's another myth that started originally, is like, oh, well, but my air moves too much, I don't think MD will work. No. The more air, the more better. All right. So make sure that we prefer good air movement. Get that molecule everywhere. All right. So let's talk dosage. So originally, I think before, a lot of this research was done, the idea was a high, medium, and low dose would result in high, medium, or low control, right? But that's not the case. That's not the case at all. And we need to stop thinking about mating disruption and pheromones as insecticides. I am just as guilty as doing it. Like I said, I came from row crop pesticide background. So this is not the way to think about it. It's not high, medium, and low control. It's actually lengths of time. So if you're going to go through a visualization step with me, imagine that at a certain line in your mind, above that line is where mating disruption happens. That's the concentration of pheromone in the air that causes mating disruption. And below that, mating disruption isn't happening. So at a low rate, you're basically putting it out there, the low dispenser density, you're putting it out there right at the rate that it takes to cause mating disruption. So if we think about this in lengths of time, we mean if you go out with a low rate, you're going to get mating disruption, but it's going to be for a shorter period of time. Medium and high. Why is that? Well, if you put out the high rate, you have overloaded that facility with pheromones. So it's going to give you more longevity before the amount of pheromone in the air reduces to the point that it's below that threshold of permeation that is causing mating disruption. So instead of thinking of high, medium, and low control, think of it as lengths of time. Low rate equals lesser amount of time, medium is little more, and high rate, mo pheromone, mo better. All right. Always go with high, in my opinion. And stored product pests rarely have 3 months. We're always a little bit longer than that. And so I just put up our label as a, something to look at, because you should always read the labels for any product that you use. But I also included our paper here that just came out. James Miller and James Campbell with the USDA published this in the last 2 weeks. And this is one of the largest studies that was ever done in retail. Well, it's actually the most replicated study that's ever been done in mating disruption, period. And it kind of talks about the mechanism of mating disruption for Indian meal moth, which is arrestment. It's a competitive mating disruption mechanism. It's arrestment. So what that means is we overwhelm the senses and they stop doing targeted flights and they start more of a crawling behavior. It doesn't mean that they're not going to mate if they find a female. It just means they're not able to fly across the facility anymore, which does end up helping us determine where the breeding sites are in aggregation. But the other thing that this tells us about is this paper tells us that there is no difference between high, medium, and low rates. But if you read the paper closely, they changed it on an every 130 to 150 day schedule. So if you're going to be changing out your mating disruption fairly frequently, say on a quarterly basis, then by all means, maybe you should discuss lowering a rate. But one thing to think about on that is that these facilities in this paper were well air-conditioned small retail stores. And I don't think the well air-conditioned small retail store environment matches pretty much any commercial manufacturing facility I've ever been in. So again, I would go with the high rate. Placements. I don't know if you guys have seen Forgetting Sarah Marshall, but there's a part in there where he's trying to surf and he's like, all right, do less. Okay, but do more than that. That's how I always feel when I'm working with PCOs. I want to make your life less miserable. I want there to be less work to do, but at the same time, we got to do a little. And that is where it comes into knowing your site and your facility. So instead of worrying about all these grids and points of release and do I have a dispenser on every piece of racking and every footing of every racking, every pole in this warehouse, think about air movement. So like I said, air movement is crucial to facilities and to getting that molecule moving. So this is a facility that I've recently treated, and I like this because one, this facility had those big commercial fans. We all know the name of them. And then it also had a ton of forklift traffic in and out, and those forklifts can really move a lot. Speaking of forklift, let's talk about safety. Safety, we do not want to be worrying about placements to the point we forget where we are and we start placing mating disruption in places where it can get on conveyor belts, where it can get ran over, crushed, moved into things. If it's affecting any hoppers or bins or, holding containers or final product, any of that, you don't need to worry about placement so much that you are placing the mating disruption somewhere where it is a nuisance, or you're a nuisance going in there to change it out because they're working on a line or a manufacturing line, and you're like, oh, excuse me while I try and change this. No, you don't need to have it there. And that goes for equipment. Pest pressure. Ideally, I like to fan out my treatments, so I will put the highest amount of what needs to go in that facility in placements nearest the highest pest pressure or high risk sites. And then HVAC intake systems, those are important. If you have them, utilize them. Ease of inspection and maintenance. Always make it easier so that you can get in, get out quickly, efficiently. You guys have so much to do in a day. Why make it harder by placing 300 minute, hard to find placements of mating disruption? Just don't do it. And last but not least, I will say label your placements, label your placements, label your placements. So one thing we like to do with Indian meal moth is some sort of silver or gold Sharpie. You need to write the date or a dot or a 1 or a 2, some way for you to know what was the last time you changed that mating disruption and which ones are the new ones and which ones are the old ones. And it is so critical because a quick way to ruin your mating disruption is to accidentally throw out everything you just bought and keep the old ones there on accident. They're spent. So then you're like, hey, it isn't working. So I have 2 case studies here. I have, this is an older 1970s storage warehouse for super sacks, highly infested, not one fan in there. Sometimes when the people are working in there, they'll put like a box fan in, but in general, they're not in this warehouse that much, and there is not a lot of air movement. So for this one, I did more of placements like this. This is the CB mating disruption and the IMM. We would put upwards of 3 to 4 on each hook. And so no, you're not condensing your placements a whole lot. You're still covering a good amount of area, but you also don't need, 1 or 2 per every, pole that's in this building. But I think there was about 60 placements here versus this warehouse, like I talked about, had the HVAC system. It had the big fans, a lot of traffic in here. This was 3.8 million cubic feet, and we have 2 placements. That's all you need in that facility to get control because the air movement is huge. And so each site is a little different. And if you'd like to move into consolidating placements and you want to talk to us about it, let us know. So what does mating disruption do? So we've kind of talked about this, but again, for stored product pests, mating disruption is sensory overload over these other 2 competitive disruption mechanisms, and that was just defined by our last paper. So it's arrestment, it's complete sensory overload. So this is what typically we think of as happening. So you've got this male moth coming to this calling female. This was before, we really did a lot of research in this area. So we used to think, okay, so you put out all these single dispensers all over and we're causing false trail following. Well, it turns out that molecule hangs out more than we thought. And so what you really end up with is what Larry just presented, which is the Metallica situation.
Okay, if there's one AI site.
I didn't want it to actually go. So you end up with this Metallica situation where the entire facility is so inundated with pheromone that they're not long distance searching for for the female anymore. So what you're going to end up with is counts once you're under mating disruption that go a little bit like 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 55, 60, 100, 0, 0, 0. Well, we figured out where your hotspot is. So that's kind of the point in there. So how long do I need to do this? This is a question we get all the time. I put in mating disruption for 3 months. I took it out and they're back. Well, yeah, that's going to happen because it's kind of a long-term investment. So when you work closely with us in installing mating disruption, we have 2 different phases. The first phase is active remediation. So this is what, depending on your influx of new and mated females and depending upon your starting population, structure looks like. You have an older structure full of fiberglass and holes in the walls and things that you cannot clean to giant equipment you can't get behind. It's going to take a little bit longer because in those breeding sites, they are still able to breed even if they cannot find each other with that pheromone. And so in that first year of active remediation, you're focusing on a structural population. We call it your own house fire. You need to put out your own fire before we start pointing fingers of where the fire is coming from. So what you're doing at that point is you're identifying sources of infestation and hotspots within your structure. You're removing those, you're cleaning, you're trying to, spot spray and crack and crevice a lot of these aggregated breeding sites to try and diminish where this is happening, the mating disruption, because it stopped all those long distance flights. So now you're going to know within 5 meters or within 5 feet of these of 5 foot of these monitors, you're going to end up finding where the infestation site is. And then is 2 years to what we like to say forever. So what does that mean? That means once you have cleaned up your facility and you've got really low population, you are now installing mating disruption at a reduced rate, maybe not dispenser rate, but maybe you're only doing 1 or 2 installments a year, and it's in targeted times of year when you're bringing in a lot of infested product and you want to make sure you don't end up having another structural infestation. This is prophylactic, all right? So at this point, you're stopping immigrant moths and beetles from establishing. It helps trace back incoming infestation. So you're going to use this in order to say, okay, well, every time so-and-so ships their commodity in, I have a problem. It lights up these right in receiving every time. All these monitors get lit up in receiving every time this, facility ships to us. So let's trace back and go after that business because they're the problem, and then keep following that problem back, and everybody's getting a lot of business and everybody's taking care of their moths. So it's a good thing to do. Oops. I don't know how to go back. Here we go. So a really great, on this slide, we have another paper that kind of talks about IM and MEC, but I want to make sure we have time for questions. So I'm going to move a little bit faster here. But if you want to deep dive into different populations and the thresholds that we developed based on initial populations and how to use MEC in a retail environment, that's that paper that we published also this year. Here's a really good example of the active remediation versus maintenance. So this is a facility that we've been working in with cigarette beetle for a while. That first treatment was right here in 2023. We saw 2 giant peaks. These were infested product that came in, and I mean, it hit those domes hard. It was 300 or 400 per week in that situation. And so they were able to grab that, fumigate, remediate the situation. Next week it came in again, or the next month it came in again, grabbed it, fumigated, and you don't have to fumigate the whole facility. They took it out and trailer fumigated to get rid of that situation. You still kind of had some things to clean up. That next year is this blue line, because they had made the correct sanitation steps. They were able to move forward with that. And then now we have, really nice low population. So monitoring is the core of IPM. I always say you can't have your mating disruption if you don't have your monitoring. They go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. So why do we use monitoring? One, we just talked a whole lot about how to use monitoring under mating disruption for detection of hotspots. Usually those were with, if your monitor is spiking when you're under mating disruption, there's a good chance your infestation source is within 6 foot of that monitor. And you need to be using a wide variety of monitors depending upon your site. So I know everybody gets really stuck in these. I like the diamonds, the diamond shaped traps, it doesn't matter what company it is with the glue in it. That's a great trap for moths. But if your main component of what you're trying to trap out is not a moth, we have other options. So I would look into Definitely placing more domes, or we also have, a StoreGuard 3, which is a type of product that is meant for beetles to land and walk on. Beetles are not huge behaviorally to just fly into hanging traps. And if you get a lot of beetles in a hanging trap, it means you have a lot of beetles, because that is not their favorite thing to do. And then designing escalation procedures. So if you only had one monitor in, a 800,000 cubic foot room, now you're going to need to put in more monitors to figure out where in that room is the problem. Trap shutdown is a myth, but it is best practice to keep your monitor about 10 foot away from your mating dispenser. That's not always possible, but we highly recommend that you do. Just finishing up here, as a reminder, these, mating disruption is an organic option. So if you are running out of, ways to control a situation, and it's Indian meal moth, or sometime in the future, hopefully, a CB situation, then definitely try this as an option. And then with that, that is my QR code to my LinkedIn. I'm constantly posting different things that I see. So feel free to follow me on there. And with that, I am done.
All right. Good stuff, Jessica. So we do have a little bit of time for some questions, folks. If you have questions, I wrote down a bunch of stuff for both you and Larry. So I was just thinking kind of broadly here, Jessica, and maybe you and James and Larry can comment on this. If it's a food production facility, what's the likelihood that it has had Indian meal moths or will have Indian meal moths? Is that a guarantee? That's probably a guarantee, I'm thinking.
I think so. From my experience, where it's small retail, even pharmacies, grocery stores, if there's commodity, any type of food, and again, there's such a wide variety of food preferences. So you take cigarette beetle, it's not just tobacco that they eat. Anything from chocolate to spice to peanuts, I mean, you name it, they'll eat it. If it's a grain-based product or any type of edible food commodity, like I say, from cocoa powder, chocolate, even flour, Indian meal moth, kind of the same. They just eat so many different things. It's almost like saying termites in the South. It's not if your house could be infested, it's when, right? So I think it's just again worldwide, cosmopolitan pest. They're found throughout North America. So
it's like the German cockroach of commercial commercial food production, right? So where that thought came from was, so typically with the industry, you probably start with a complaint, you implement a mating disruption program, you get the problem under control. But you just commented on this, Jessica. Are there ever cases where there's not a problem, and it would be smart to implement a mating disruption program proactively?
Oh, absolutely. I would 100% always do that. I mean, like you said, it's not the typical case. But ideally, we would always recommend that if Indian meal moth or CB in the future are going to be a problem, being proactive about that is ideal. And that's one of those things where you can use your data to help you, to guide you on that. Mm-hmm. So if you think that, okay, so July through September is my heaviest year, there's a really good chance that I'm going to end up with some sort of Indian meal moth infestation at some point in that time. There's a good chance that if you wanted to just install some sort of mating disruption prophylactically in that time and use your monitors to guide you on whether or not you need to up that dosage later, or if you actually end up start getting what we call an infestation, is when in your facility, if you have every trap hitting with an Indian meal moth ubiquitously across the entire facility, you get 10 to 15 or higher. Even depending on the commodity, it can be ones and twos, can be very serious. But it's throughout the entire facility. I would always put mating disruption in because that's not giving you any clarity. All that's telling you is that that there are Indian meal moths in your facility. If you were to put mating disruption in there, even if those aren't threshold numbers for you, you might be able to determine where those 1s and 2s throughout your facility are actually coming from. You can use, your sanitation efforts. You can remove that infested product. Get your crack and crevice in or fumigate whatever came in on a trailer and then move forward. You don't always have to be in a crisis scenario before you call us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. My thoughts on it, Dan. Outdoor monitoring, again, this is a worldwide pest, especially here in the US in warm climates, year round, 8 generations a year. Typically, we'll see in operations a high peak in July, or the end of June rather. And then July, August is a little hot for Indian meal moth. And then September, you'll see another big peak in the population. So outdoor monitoring, indoor monitoring, absolutely. And then use that data, like Jessica was saying, is maybe put in that dose according to what your history shows in monitoring.
It seems, Larry, that there's a little bit of art to it. I mean, Jessica went through all the calculations, but experience has got to play a big role in this, in mating disruption, because
Yeah.
the industry is it's complaint driven, right? So the industry, the pest control industry is complaint driven. We do very little that's proactive usually. So you have a complaint, and the model is always you go solve the problem. And committing to something like this is almost like committing to a termite baiting program, right? So you have got to commit to it from a long-term perspective. And it takes time to see results, but you have to have confidence. It works. I've seen it with the cigarette beetles too, that when you put too much pheromone in an environment, and now we have, by the way, if some of you may have missed it, but we got a Pink Floyd reference there too. So we got Metallica and Pink
disruption
Floyd.
If you don't put out your monitors.
We're the cool bug nerds. See,
That's right. I had a follow-up question about Capra beetle. Has it been found in North America?
It has, and it has been mitigated several times since 1970. Currently, supposedly, there is no population in the United States. But I think we all, even in the scientific community, can say that how it would be very challenging to know for sure that there isn't one because they are so closely related to our warehouse beetle. They look very similar to warehouse beetle. And so, for the everyday inspection, I mean, who's going to, take apart sex parts when they're changing a trap? So chances are probably maybe. But if you're asking where I think you're asking, and yes, we were looking at warehouse beetle mating disruption. It's down the road, though. We're very early.
Yeah, very good.
Dan, if you look at a lot of the news articles coming out of customs from airports, it's almost a weekly occurrence where they're finding Trichoderma granarium in foods being brought on into the country. So I would argue Jess is 100% right that we probably do have some.
Yeah.
But it's like the Trichoderma species, it's so hard to ID and mis-ID.
Yes.
It's probably out there, but it's not at the levels like when California had their big mitigation steps back in, I think, the 70s, right, Jess? They had a huge infestation and they finally got rid of it. But internationally, like certain foreign countries like Greece, it's as prevalent as Indian meal moth and Lasioderma. Other, India as well, Pakistan, the spike. So I would suspect that it's inevitable, right? These insects are going to keep coming through, but that's a tough. Luckily, adults don't fly, so maybe we got that going for us that they're over crawling insect. But yeah, we sell a ton of the APHIS quarantine monitors still to government and agricultural extension in certain states. So it's a big moving thing.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, I had a project with Customs at the Port of Savannah, and it was the Capra beetle was at the top of their list. Every time they open a container, they're like, "Where's the Capra beetle? Where's the Capra beetle?" And I thought then it was probably inevitable. Anybody else got any questions here? Let me check here, see if I got any in the. Q&A. Nothing in the Q&A. Could somebody confirm that Indian meal moth has to mate one time? Is that right, Larry? Do they have to mate? A female has to mate one time to produce all 400 of her eggs. Is that right?
Yes. As far as I know, that is correct. And the cool thing about we talk about mating disruption, we didn't really cover it, but her viable egg lifespan is about 5 days. So every day we can prevent her from mating that one time, she loses about 20% egg production.
Or
So
more.
if she
Yeah.
closes on day one, she's
I
going to
see.
live for a couple more days.
Yeah.
Every day we prevent them from connecting, you're losing 20%, and then by day 4 or 5, those eggs are really losing viability, even if they get even if they mate, the egg value decreases over that last 4 days. So
Absolutely.
yeah, just the delayed or denied mating, because I think once is plenty.
And Lisa was just pointing out, she's sitting right beside me, that the hatchability is like 95% of eggs that are laid by a female are actually hatch. They have a really high hatch rate.
Yeah, I think that's true.
So
Yeah,
not
Tess
almost all
maintains a
400
colony.
eggs that she lays are going to hatch.
Exactly.
It's kind
So
of scary.
yeah, 20% is a lot,
Yeah.
10% is a lot. So delayed and denied mating, even if we can keep them apart for 3 days, the value that fecundity goes down obviously over time. So
Right.
that
And just
is
to
the whole
add to that, I think it's important. This is where we note that mating disruption is part of an IPM strategy. So if you're relying on mating disruption alone, they're still going to have those mating events until slowly over time you break down those aggregate mating colonies versus colony used lightly in this situation. But if you are using sanitation, you're removing the infestations in that first year, you're working really hard to exclude and target where the infestations are coming from. If you're using crack and crevice and MD, well, now you're getting rid of those breeding sites within the first 6 months of having your MD, and that population is going to decline very quickly because you're stopping every mating event from then on. So the faster you work down that population and use it as a part of a bigger IPM strategy, the more success you'll have with it.
Yeah, Dan, that's a great question on biology because a lot of people know Indian meal moth, the #1 store product pest in the world, but like the larval wander from the food site is almost like a predatory response. So when you think of the biggest, I won't call it a myth, but similar to a myth that we hear in our industry is that, well, just remove the infested product. And our answer is, of course, that's your IPM step and component is why leave it there? Because it's going to translocate and spread. But at the same time, just removing that, say, bag of rice on a grocery store that you found infested doesn't mean the larvae already start winning to their pupation phase and ended up infesting the edible beans on the aisle right behind it. And so that's where, when Larry
But
showed
hopefully
that
they don't mate
triangle,
once it hatches.
Yep, biology is
That's right.
it's so critical even in the most common store product pest, the brown
Yeah.
pantry moth, right? So I always tell people that's a simple answer, but it's not as simple if you don't want to call back in 30 days when
Yeah.
that life cycle repeats.
That's a
Because
really
they're
good
gonna-
point.
Yeah, they're going to pupate on the top of the ceiling of that area,
Yeah.
put right back on the next bag, and
Right.
now you're blaming the rice manufacturer when realistically you infested the next bag, but you didn't know. So it's when we get involved, we start to educate
see.
both sides, and now everyone's going, oh, well, hey, it starts with identification, biology, and risk. So those are kind of those scenarios that it's almost its own podcast and its own thing of, myths and store product pests or
Yeah.
promulgated conversations that we've been taught. So
I mean,
interesting.
everybody can relate to having them in their own home. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
those larvae hightail it, man. When they they hightail and they head to the ceiling, and there they
The
are.
arrested larvae also very fast.
Yeah, and I think I saw a question pop up.
Yes, you
Somebody
did.
about a microdose.
Yeah. So what about the same concept in residential structures? Is there any value to going into your pantry and putting 5 traps in your kitchen?
How often are you planning on reinfesting your pantry? Like that's so I can understand it as in I found, a problem. But mating disruption, man, it's really for situations where, I mean, maybe they're not, if they never plan on cleaning, you have a situation where you are constantly infested, and that's your biggest nuisance. I would feel like in that situation, cockroaches would probably end up being your biggest nuisance. But if MD, if Indian meal moth are really, you just can't seem to not put your chicken food in your house, then yeah, it would work. And
Yeah,
get your cubes right.
No, I think
All
that's
your
products are-
cubes.
all of them are, they do have a residential, I mean, actually even like Sidetrack has a
They have a
ended,
residential label.
residential label that we've done at the time. The biggest thing I've noticed in my technical call outs when we get to go to a residence that we had one in East Texas where they were about to Vicane fumigate an entire home, like 4,000 square feet for Indian meal moth because they were at their wits' end.
Yeah.
And before that trigger got pulled, we went and did an assessment with the pest manager. It was like the third or fourth pest management firm there, of course, like you know how that stuff goes. And it happened to be I caught one larval cast skin on a soffit going up to some pipes coming out of like a boiler room. And it appeared to be Plodia. So we started looking and we found uncapped old boiler pipes coming out that had no boiler inside. So we put a trap in a tree, and over the course of like 2 days caught something like 200 IMM fairly that were, so the problem happened is the homeowner kept using so much pheromone that he was buying pest managers that his house now, he did have an issue eventually in history. But the problem is they would have Vicane that house, fumigated it, removed the tarp, and they would have went right back in. And now it's as simple as, prevention, right? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Ben Franklin said that. So at the end of the day, it was, some mesh screening, some education, and now a temporary monitor outside just to keep them kind of what the population is. But it does show, there are devices made for smaller spaces for monitoring. That liquids and foggable spray was realistically made for spot treatments in small areas. But I always caution the homeowner that even in my 2-acre home, I catch 100 to 200 moths in my trees just in nature. That's just rural Oklahoma. So I always tell people, in a resident setting, you can use the monitors, you can use mating disruption, but you really have to understand the species you're dealing with and where it's going to react. And if you're not monitoring outside to confirm or deny what's going on, and obviously you find a bag of rice with them crawling on it. Yep, you got them in your house. Now you can do your steps to take that, but maybe putting 15 professional monitors meant for a coffee warehouse or a bakery, that's meant for large spaces. Maybe choosing a device that's made for a low amplitude loaded lure. Like we offer one called a microdot, but it's made to just do small areas. So that way, hopefully you don't get that cross contamination, if you will, of pulling from somewhere else.
Yeah. I know homeowners, where Greg's coming from here, where the question comes from is homeowners get hot under the collar very quickly. And some of them are like, they're spotless. Their home is totally spotless. I mean, they find one moth that's coming from an attic somewhere through a fireplace, and they're ready to fumigate. They just, they can't, they're from Pennsylvania or, they're from up north somewhere. They can't stand bugs. And it's a different mindset.
Yeah, we send a lot of folks to extension. You get like you guys, extension entomology departments, whether it's Department of Ag or a university where Jess came from that side of, because you kind of need to have that unbiased. It's not a contract pest manager. You need to have someone that's a specialist that can kind of explain to them. Yeah, it's one reason why we don't market our stuff on the consumer markets, because it's just such a, well, this didn't catch them all. And we're like, well, no, yeah, we know that because that's not what it does. But if it was, it'd have an EPA registration number because it'd be a control. And that's one of the big things, that we discuss and fight of that is that it's still an option. It's something you can do, but exterior monitoring is becoming so critical now to some of these components and programs like the speakers talked about, that it was something that's been missed forever. We showed the video, obviously, of the red flower beetle in Texas, but we've had a pistachio processor actually bury shells on its property in 40 acres. And it was like a plight of mosquito of red flower beetle coming to the pistachio factory every night. And they asked us, well, what do we do? This is what we did. And I'm like, man, why did you do that? Well, it's organic. Like it makes sense, but you put all the food outside and now they're rearing and I'm like, you got to dig it up. I don't know
Yeah.
how to treat soil with sort product pests. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
sure there might be something, but those things have happened where I've sat there and witnessed the flight come off a field going, oh, this is crazy. So
Oh no.
it's the conversation points that go with that. It comes back
We have
to
one final question here about pheromone traps for fabric pests in secondhand clothing stores. So I've had Indian meal moths and clothes moths at my house before, and single trap is just, I mean, they fill up, and especially I'm not sure if this person is asking about fabric pests or clothes moths. It says fabric pest.
Yeah, that's the way I titled it in the talk, was fabric pest, again,
Yeah.
textile. So clothing moth is two main species, webbing or case making. I saw that from Trey. Hey Trey, how's it going, man? Yeah, to answer your question, I routinely talk to different clothing company stores about monitoring for clothes moth, and they work fine. Yeah, there's multiple sources for those types of traps, and yeah, you can monitor it, but I think we all admit it's not the absolute greatest. It's not as good as Indian meal moth, but clothing moth, yeah, you can monitor and detect for that. It is a good monitor.
Well, I think we're going to have to go ahead and wrap it up. I appreciate the time from both of you. Really good stuff.
Well,
Just want to remind everybody to get their sign-in sheets to us at scan or take a picture of your sign-in sheet and send it to gtbop@uga.edu. We'll try to get these processed in the next week or so. So appreciate you, Larry. Thanks, Jessica.
Of course.
Thanks for
Dan,
attending, James.
yeah, Dan and Lisa and Rich and the rest of the
Thank you so
UGA
much.
team, thank you so much for what you do and allowing us to speak today. We appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Really good stuff. I'm sure everybody appreciated it.
Good deal.
Thanks all.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rich. We
Bye.
appreciate
Thanks for
it.
joining.
Take care.
Thanks.